Now, he took that talent that he showed winning this title on. He came fourth in the Olympic Games marathon in Seoul in 1988, and that was a tough old experience. I think off the top of my head, I think it was Gilindo Bourdin. Did he win it?
He did.
Back in 1988. And that, I remember, being a punishing experience. And he was a winner of Tokyo marathons and the famous Fukuoka marathon, where we saw some very fast times last year as well. So this event does have a heritage of perhaps being the launch pad of outstanding careers, not necessarily winning massive races when we get to the major commercial marathons, the big city marathons, where we have the pacemakers and we have the East Africans running 2.2s, 2.3s, and on a really bad day, a 2.4. But as you say, Rob, when we get to the championship competitions, when they're run in the heat of summer, in conditions which are not necessarily conducive to fast times, when there are no pacemakers, when suddenly, and I know events like the Beijing Olympics in 2008, when we saw some almost obscene times run in desperate conditions, but when maybe the race times are not quite as quick.
There are two different animals, aren't there? There are those who can follow a pacemaker and run 2:04 plus change, but can very rarely demonstrate that in a major championship. And then you've got guys who are just incredibly consistent at racing. Stefano Baldini, we talked about Bourdin winning in Seoul in '88, and you were talking about the Athens Marathon as well. That men's was absolutely incredible.
And that was Baldini, wasn't it?
Yes, Stefano Baldini, I'm pretty sure he never ran inside 2:07. Olympic champion, I think perhaps a couple of European titles, and 2 World Championship bronze medals. One of the best major championship racers in history.
He was a thinking racer.
He was a fantastic racer.
A great tactician,
and not
that's
one
what
of the
it was about.
fastest.
Absolutely. And there are men and women who are made to run championship marathons. They're entirely different affairs, and believe me, they are on days like this. 54 minutes on the clock. Some of these men are going to be out there for another hour and a half, and you don't want to be, in all honesty, looking like Shinners at the moment, and on your own. Clearly, I think he's got a bit of a stitch. I'd be very, very surprised if he gets home today.
Now we have another casualty from that lead group. It's Pak Choi, who was 5th in the Asian Games 4 years ago. He was a man I was mentioning who performed very well in Rio a couple of years ago. He has obviously run into some problems here. Very, very close to those concrete bollards on the right-hand side. You can see the air's clearing a little bit here as the sun begins to burn off some of the early morning haze, which means it's getting hotter and hotter. So Pak Choi has become detached from that lead group. He's just at the bottom of your picture there.
So he's about 30-40 metres, and that gap is going to grow and grow, and he's another athlete at this stage of the race. They're not even halfway.
So we're down
he's
to
going to
8.
struggle, isn't he?
We are down to 8 now. And some, well, 4 in fact, half the field deciding to go under the cooling showers, 4 deciding they don't need it. I'm not sure about you, Martin. I would have thought in conditions such as these, even though this is where these guys are from, it's where they've done most of their training, I would have thought any opportunity you can take to cool down, you would do. But obviously half of them deciding they want to stay dry.
Shin of Korea on his own. And there is that leading group of 8. Alabasi, you mentioned him, wearing the colours of Bahrain, former North African, Moroccan. Has got himself back onto that group. Now, in all likelihood, that is because the sting has gone out of the pace at the front. It'll be interesting to see if we do get a reliable, authentic split time at halfway, because that will start to give us some idea of what these men are capable of. You would have thought if they're going off a modest pace, there will be somebody there, particularly Inui, maybe Sonoda, his Japanese teammate, who will be looking to run the so-called negative split. When we talk in those terms, what we're saying is a negative split is basically running the second half of the race faster than the first. And the two Japanese, you can see there, that's Tsunoda on the right, as Rob so beautifully put it with his French Legionnaire's headwear, which is absolutely right, protecting the back of his neck from the direct heat. But there you go, the run through of that group.
8 men still in with a chance of the first athletics gold of the 2018 Asian Games. There'll be no medal harder earned than those in the 2 marathons, although perhaps the 50k walkers may argue against us. We'll be seeing them on Thursday morning, but almost all in a line. And I tell you what, Abdi Abdo looks pretty relaxed. He's now just obscured a little bit behind Tsunoda. Very comfortable in that lead group. 21-year-old Bahrainian. Martin mentioned the fluttering flags a little earlier on, and you can see there is just the merest hint of a breeze, which I think would be quite welcome considering how stifling it's been here.
Very welcome
over the last couple of days.
Yes, there's a lot of looking around, isn't there? Because there are men here who are running well within themselves, others who frankly are not. And I think by and large, they all know quite who they are in that respect, because certainly the 2 Japanese, they should be okay here. Abdo's looking strong there, 1-2-1, right in the middle. Barely moves a muscle, does he? But there are others here who are having a good look around. The Chinese, 198, you can see there, at the front with the peak cap on, looking pretty relaxed at the moment, is Duo Ruji. Well, a more typical scene on the road in Jakarta can be seen there on the overpass, because one thing that Jakarta tends to have are fairly busy roads. Looking down on this marathon route, it is close to unique. I know it's Saturday morning, but even on Saturday mornings it tends to be quite busy in this part of the world. But this section of the route closed down, the out and back loop, 20 kilometres, a little bit tagged on at either end to ensure we get the full till 42.2. Great tradition, the marathon. Goes right back, of course, to the name itself and the history of Olympism. With the 385 yards, supposedly because it was tagged on at the end of White City back in 1908, so the runners could go past the Queen. So I suppose, in its own little way, imperialism lives on in the history of the marathon. 42.2k, that's how we refer to it these days, rather than 26 miles, 385 yards.
It's a great event which tests body and mind. The old adage, I think, is very true, and I've run a few marathons, certainly not at the pace we're watching at the moment in these conditions. In terms of how your body feels, halfway is 20 miles. That is how much the last 6 miles, 10k if you want to refer to it in metric, that is how much the end of the race can take out of you. Spectacular changes in leaderboards can and often do occur at the business end of major championship marathons. And as an example of that, Pak Choi now becoming further detached, still going. The man from the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, running his 20th marathon, but he's decided the pace from the leading 8 is too much for him. Still looks okay, but that's a big gap for him to bridge. And look at the loping ease with which Abdo is making progress down the course. We've got some distinctive styles here. Inouye skipping along on his toes, and Abdo of Bahrain wearing 1-2-1 on the right of picture, loping along without a care in the world at the moment.
Yeah, you get a sense there, you saw 1 or 2 helicopters lurking. It's a real a stunning job from the broadcasting team here. We've got cameras on the road on motorbikes, we've got helicopters hovering. It's a real logistical challenge. If you think about the organisers putting on an event like this, Jakarta putting its best foot forward for these games, closing the roads here so that we can do this in the morning in a city where much of the infrastructure is stretched, certainly on the roads, by the amount of traffic there is on here. And we've got our team up there in the air with the helicopters and down there on the ground with the bikes. And in the heart of it, of course, we've got men running 42.2 kilometres, a tough old trip. There we go. The Asian Games heading in one direction and Saturday morning in Jakarta in the other.
I was doing my research on Jakarta just as a city and its history, and the best description I found was in one of the guidebooks broadcasters receive when we arrive in a country for a major event. The unofficial nickname for Jakarta is the Big Durian. It says because the durian is the king of fruits. It might not smell very good, but it tastes brilliant. The principle of it is people are aware that Jakarta has its complexities and its issues, but there's an immense pride here in what the city is and what the city represents in the fourth most populated country in the world. So that's the unofficial nickname of Jakarta, the Big Durian. I quite like that.
It doesn't smell nice, but it tastes all right.
Something like that.
So, wearing 121, there is Abdi Abdo. Just floating on the outside. You get a sense, not only with him, but also Hayato Sonoda wearing 477. Those two men very, very comfortable at the moment. Hiroto Inui, the Japanese, you can just see partially obscured behind the shoulder of the Chinese duo Bushi wearing 198. There are certainly 3 or 4 men at the moment who are running well within their capacity, and they still have a fair amount of fuel to burn. 1 or 2 others, well, that may not be the case.
We started the race, 21 men from 13 nations back in the Gelora Bung Karno Stadium. We're now down to a lead pack of 8 as we edge towards the halfway stage of this men's marathon here in Jakarta.
And that, Rob, has been the pattern now, hasn't it? For certainly 10 or 15 minutes. These 8 men all running together. There is just a sense that there is some cooperation between them to get through the next, 5, 10 kilometres. And then at some point, well, the gloves will come off. The racing will really start. There will be 1 or 2 here, I've got no doubt, who simply are hurting now or drop off the pace in this period without anybody applying any particular injection of pace or tempo. But I think there's a degree of cooperation certainly among some there, and this is a dreadful way to have to run a race. Before you realise what's happened, Kim there of Korea on his own, the leading group just slowly edging their way ahead of him, although he's been on his own a long while now, although he's trying desperately hard to try and claw his way back. Just possible that leading group, having lost a bit of tempo, have allowed him to do that.
I think he is coming back to that group, and he's gone past Pak Choi from the People's Republic of Korea. So Pak Choi going backwards. What a run that is, if he can manage to reattach himself to that group. And we saw a few people just outside the stadium an hour or so ago. This is superb support for the marathon, especially bearing in mind we're still only just a shade beyond 7 a.m. on a Saturday, when people could be forgiven for having a little bit of a lie-in after a hard week at work. But news is spreading that the Asian Games marathon is producing some good drama here, and we'll watch to see whether the Korean can indeed bridge that gap. He's having a go. You can just see him in the background because you've got the second television motorbike following him just to track his progress.
I guess the issue is, Rob, and you're vastly experienced in doing these races, how many times have you seen this? Athletes clawing their way back onto the leading group. There's a reason they've got to do that. It's because at some point they've struggled with the tempo. We're not halfway yet. If they get back, how long do many of them tend to last? I think for him, he needs to get somebody to run with, and of course the most sensible thing is to try and bridge the gap in front of you rather than wait for those chasing you to catch up. But just a little hiatus as the drink stables, when it's 8 men though. And there's the cooperation. You can see bottles being passed around. That's the old Marathon Runners Union. Well, it may seem a little odd and a little contradictory because these men will be going toe-to-toe, gloves off, in about half an hour, 45 minutes time, but they're perfectly happy, many of them, to be sharing drinks bottles and sponges and the like.
Oh, there's such a mutual understanding. It's a bit like that old unwritten rule that you give a wave when you see a fellow runner out, especially when conditions are brutal. If you're out for an early morning run and it's lashing with rain, you always give a little wave to the shadowy figure running in the opposite direction on the other pavement. There's a great mutual respect among athletes, and in particular among distance runners. Everybody knows there is no shortcut to a PB or a major championship medal. You really do have to earn it the hard way. Right, we're edging towards the halfway stage of this men's marathon. And now the race proper will start to begin to unfold. I just saw Kim going round that corner. That's the gap he's got to bridge. The man in ninth at the top of your picture. The gap was around about 12 or 13 seconds. There he is. That's the view. And up ahead, the familiar sight of Serod Batachir deciding to go his own way, moving across to the left-hand side of the road. This Mongolian loves to shake things up a little bit when he goes to the front. It's almost as if he's sprinting. He's wasted so much energy there, moving across to the left-hand side, now to the right-hand side as we look at it.
He's a hard man, isn't he? How many marathons was it, you said?
This is his 56th.
56th marathon.
It's an incredible record, isn't it? And remember, if he's in the shake-up towards the end, 4 times he's run the Olympic marathon. He's never won any major medal and got so close in Incheon 4 years ago, finishing in that dreadful position of 4th. That's cameras focusing in on Kim. Got a good PB, 2:13 plus bits, 11th in Seoul in March. He's a 64.5-minute half marathon runner. And the grimacing former Moroccan El Abbasi still on that group, but still at the back. He's working very, very hard, you suspect, to stay with that group, Martin.
Yes, you get a sense that if there was an injection of pace at the front, El Abbasi would be the first to slip out of the back door. It's almost happened a couple of times already. So we're back in the area of the GBK complex. There you go, halfway. Well, it's just outside 70 minutes at the moment. That, if that is an authentic halfway split, good reason to believe it is, 1:10.32. So we're talking, as things stand, a 2:20 marathon. Now, I know it's a slightly impolite comparison, but you wouldn't win every women's major city marathon in 2:20. I think it's fair to say that there are a number of men here who are targeting that so-called negative split. Now, there will be 1 or 2 who achieve it, but quite how much you can turn this into a negative split, well, even if they run 5 minutes faster, it's still only a 2:15 marathon.
Yeah, the time is going to be irrelevant here, isn't it? And we were talking about Kim closing the gap. He had closed the gap, but we can tell with our own eyes by looking that he's now a little bit further adrift from this leading group of 8, many of whom, as you've indicated, Martin, with a halfway split of just over 70 minutes, many of whom will be very, very comfortable with this pace. I think if the two Japanese athletes and the likes of Abdo are feeling fairly comfortable, there's almost no doubt that we're going to get a negative split. It's not going to be a quick race. They're not going to challenge Nakayama's Asian Games record of 2:08.21 from 1986. But we're going to see a great half marathon now of pure racing, because many of the guys in this group will be feeling fresh, and that means we could see some very intriguing little twists of drama over this second half of the race. That's the first half done. The box is ticked. They'll be feeling pretty fresh, especially the two Japanese who have run, 2:06.54 and 2:09.34. Bhattacharya in that group has gone inside 2:10, albeit not for a while. He's run 2:15 this season, the veteran Mongolian, as the Korean still desperately tries to close the gap. A lot of those leading 8 will be feeling very comfortable.
Yes, I mean, again, it's slightly unfair when we consider the conditions, which clearly are a major factor here. But Inui, when he ran that time of 2:06.54 in Tokyo in the last 12 months, at halfway, he would have been something like 2 kilometres faster than he is here. Now, that is a huge distance, even over 21.1. And that is perhaps exactly why he's up on his toes, why he's looking as if he's on a morning training run, because he probably has done some fairly hard, sustained runs in his preparation for this in the last few weeks at this sort of pace, and gone back home and felt that he could just go out there and do it all again. So he should be feeling right within himself. And look there, he's just looking across. And his challenge from a mental side is to continually resist the temptation to go. Every time he feels that temptation, to maybe go back to or to move on to something like what he regards as his true racing pace. He's just got to say, don't do it. Don't do it. And hope that there's that little voice in the back of his head telling him, leave it, leave it, leave it. Follow a plan, decide when you're going to go, but don't be lured or tempted really by your own feelings of comfort to do it too soon.
Yeah, there's still a long way to go. I wonder, he will have gone through in his mind, he is the favourite because he has run inside 2:07 this year. He's the second fastest Asian in the world this year. I wonder if he'd gone through a 2:20 type pace scenario to halfway, I wonder how late he would leave it, because inevitably, just as they speed up a little bit, I'm sure the pace will increase gradually as they sense that they're heading towards the business end of things. 1 or 2 will drop off the pace here. Maybe it's a case of him looking round and monitoring who else is in that group, including his compatriot Sonoda, who's wearing 4:77. I wonder how late, if he is feeling really good, Inui, and he should be at 2:20, bearing in mind he has run inside 2:07 this year, I wonder how late he's prepared to leave it. Maybe the answer to that question is entirely dictated by who's around him at 30k, for instance.
That's right. I mean, it's all about striking a balance, isn't it? Because I think we can work on the basis he's not the only one in that leading group, which is now in danger of reducing from 8 to 7. You can see El Abbasi. It's 3 or 4 metres as they get the sponges, but El Abbasi, I don't think he's going to be there for too much longer. But at the same time as being wary not to go too soon, there is a danger in going too late. You can allow men who may not be as comfortable, have quite the same quality as you do, give them a free ticket into what is essentially a run-off for the title. And if you leave that too late, then you can come unstuck. So it's all about striking a balance, and you'd like to think that an athlete of his quality, a man who's run 2:06, has come out here with a race plan. You hope he's done his homework on his other rivals. It does amaze me in sport sometimes, despite all the sophistication sportsmen, women, teams have, and how much we hear often about the extent of preparation, sometimes the most obvious things are passed by. If you're going to run a major city marathon here, you've got to take, or sorry, should I say a championship marathon here, you've got to take a look at your opposition. You can put a black line through most of them because you know they're simply not in the same class as you. You look at their strengths and weaknesses. You try and see the race through their eyes, and you think, well, how are they going to run it? How are they going to try and beat me? And you'd like to think, as much as athletes will tell you, look, I'm going to go out there and run my own race. Yeah, I mean, it's sometimes, I mean, that's a bit of a platitude, because you do have to, I think, take cognizance of what your big rivals are going to do as well, and you have to adopt some sort of race plan which is going to counter that. But we've now got, well, it's back to 8 again, but for how much longer? It'll become 7 in a moment. We're moving into the second half of the race. I would have thought, Rob, in the next 10, 12, maybe 15 minutes, this leading group really is going to get shaken up.
Yeah, once we get to the stage where they've been running for an hour and a half, they are all going to start to think about their strategy as they edge towards the last 6 miles, 10k. Both Japanese men right up in that group. You would have to say by body language, Sonoda doesn't look quite as comfortable. There he is in the shot, just running alongside the very tall Duo Buji of China. Sonoda doesn't look quite as comfortable as Inui, but let's not forget Abdi Abdo, loping along in that group, just missed a medal in the Youth Olympics over 3,000 metres. The veteran from Mongolia, Surod Bhattacharya, who was just off the podium 4 years ago, and the man from the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. We've lost Pak Choi, but Ri Kang Bom is still in that group. He's won the last 2 editions of the Pyongyang Marathon. He's gone inside 2:13. The fact that the pace in the first half of the race was so modest, obviously we're making allowances for how humid it is, makes this second half of the race fascinating, because almost all the men in this group, possibly notwithstanding El Abbasi, who's been grimacing for about the last 15k, the big loping Bahrainian at the back has just looked at his watch. Other than him, the rest look okay here, and they will all start to see this as an opportunity. We can't hang the gold medal around Inui's neck. Yes, he's running on his toes, and he's the quickest man this year in that group of 8. But there'll be others who fancy this as a massive opportunity to get themselves an Asian Games medal. The very first medal event on the athletics programme here on the streets of Jakarta, which have been cleared for this race, and there'll be some atmosphere as they head back towards the finish, the glory and the relief of the finish line in the Gelora Bung Karno Stadium. All that early morning haze has burnt off. Good sunshine, great work by the cameramen and women in the helicopters, really enjoying this coverage. The most ultimate physical game of chess you could possibly play. And now, once again, the grimacing El Abbasi has allowed a few metres to grow, so very soon 8 is going to become 7, and I think it is in the process of happening right now. Still no move yet from either man from Japan, and the veteran 36-year-old from Mongolia still setting the pace. 7.93. Tony Payne having a good run, the former New Zealander, now representing Thailand. His PB just a shade inside 2:20. So he's on course for a PB if he can keep this going. And he must have made some good progress up through the field, because he is the leading chaser, where for so long we were watching whether Kim of Korea could close that gap. And in not too distant future, he'll have El Abbasi to try and reel in. The lead group is now down to 7 with 1 hour and 21.5 minutes on the clock. Bhattacharya looks over his shoulder. The main contenders are still there. And look at that. We just saw Bhattacharya, Martin, waving his right hand as if to say, come on, I'm not the only one here who can run at the front and set the pace. I think the Mongolian's getting frustrated with some of the others in this lead group. He perhaps feels he shouldn't be the only one pushing the pace on.
Somebody we haven't mentioned an awful lot, but who's looking very relaxed in the blue vest from the People's Republic of Korea. White peak cap right at the back, Ri Kang Bom. Has run 2:12.53 this year, which in global terms isn't particularly great shakes, but at this schedule, as you do just get a sense that that early morning mist, the real dense humidity just burning off a little bit, but believe me, it'll be getting warm out there. It'll be pushing up 30 degrees now, very, very close to it, through 25 kilometers now in the sort of 82, 83 minutes. And when we look at this race and we break it down into sectors, we've almost now got to switch into the way we do this for major city women's marathons, because this is going to be closer to a 2:15, 2:16 than certainly the sort of 2:02s, 2:03s, 2:04s we have become associated with at major city marathons. This is very different. These men, the winner here, is going to be out there still for more than 50 minutes. There's still a long, long way to go.
That's why these races are so absorbing to watch as they gradually unfold. Always one or two drifting off the back. Tony Payne for Thailand, 29-year-old, trying to bridge the gap up to the leaders. Ella Bashi of Bahrain has once again reattached himself, and they've noticeably slowed here, because look at the speed with which Payne of Thailand has closed down that last 30 or 40 meters. So at one stage we were looking as though we were going to be down to 7. Not only has Ella Bashi managed to reattach himself, so too has Tony Payne, who has gone, by the way, straight to the front.
Well, this is a remarkable run when you consider he's the man who eased down on the accelerator as they left the main stadium. He's got a best time of 2:19, which doesn't even put him really in the same postcode at the end, the same zip code as a number of men in this field. But it is also, it serves to illustrate just how modest at the moment the pace is here. So you'd have to think there are men here who still feel as if they're out there for a morning jog. Inui, I would have thought, top of the list. His teammate, Sonoda, as well. Maybe even the Chinese runner, their duo.
And the significant factor of that replay was because Surod Bhattacharya, who's always given himself 5 or 10 meters on the rest at those drink stations, missed his own nutrition there. And the experienced man, who's done over 50 marathons, missed out on all drinks available at that station. So he will need to make absolutely certain that the next time there's a water station, that he doesn't miss out, because even though he has run 50 plus marathons, in these conditions they cannot afford to go without their water or their own specific concoction of energy gels and nutrition. But Bhattacharya, the Mongolian, missed out at that previous drink station.
Yes, I do feel a little for Tony Payne, because he's made an awful lot of ground. He still, though, has to be out there for at least 50 minutes, perhaps more.
It's a great story that he's managed to rejoin this group. And I wonder if his reattachment to the leaders begins to make the favourites like Inui, Sonoda and Abdo feel as though maybe it's time to push on. Because what they don't want is somebody having an inspired race and perhaps giving them some problems towards the business end You do sometimes find extraordinary one-off performances in major championships. Men and women becoming inspired by what they've seen up ahead of them on the course, and Payne will be loving the fact that he's managed to reattach himself. But having said that, he is now once again off the back, so perhaps that glorious reattachment was a temporary one.
Yes, you get some idea of the gaps that have opened. 48 seconds back to the chasing group. There he is wearing his Thailand vest, Tony Payne. So 8 became 7, became 8, became 9. And I think we're in danger of seeing Tony Payne slipping off the back again.
This is interesting, Martin. Sonoda has decided to go to the front, and he's got Bhattacharya just behind him. Abdo still loping along. Inouye looking very good, just cooling his left arm and now his right arm with a bit of a sponge. Bhattacharya looking over his shoulder. Payne may rue that little burst to rejoin the leaders. Perhaps a little flutter of adrenaline with over an hour and a half in his legs. That could prove a little bit costly for the Thailand athlete. And it's Sonoda now who has decided to take things on. Maybe felt as though the time had come to just gradually begin winding up the pace a little bit. Payne's gait looks a touch laboured.
Oh, it certainly does, doesn't it? I'm just getting the first hint here that Sonoda is starting to race. He is a quality marathon runner. Finished second behind the South African Desmond Mokubu at home in the Beppu Oida Marathon. That was back in February, in conditions a good deal cooler than this. And that was in a time well inside 2:0:10. It was more the sort of 2:8s and 2:9s that they were running there. So he's somebody who inevitably will be feeling a bit uncomfortable in these conditions, but he's now starting to race. This is happening. That is why also the former Moroccan you can see at the back of the group there in 8th place. Expect him to drop back quite swiftly, but it's the Japanese, the second of those, Hayato Sonoda, just starting to race a little, just easing down on the accelerator, just getting a sense of what damage he can try and do to one or two of those behind. And I think Inouye, who is following his teammate, will be fairly comfortable with that.
I think I agree. I was just thinking that as you were talking. I think Inouye will almost be a little bit relieved that someone's just beginning to push the pace back up to that which he'll be used to racing, Hiroto Inouye, because there won't be many races in recent, certainly big city marathons, where he's gone through halfway outside 70 minutes, the favourite. But the big names are just beginning to gather themselves now for this final assault on the big title. It's still looking good for both Japanese men, but it's also turning out to be a fine race for Bhattacharya at the moment, the Mongolian. And Abdi Abdo, the 21-year-old from Bahrain, loping along in that group. Let's not forget about, we've mentioned him a couple of times, Ri Kang Boon, winner of the Pyongyang Marathon a couple of times this year and last year. The two Chinese athletes, Dong Gujian, national champion this year, 2:14, so he should be fairly comfortable at this pace. And Duo Buji, second behind his compatriot in those national championships. Both the Chinese men raced in Rio. Dong was 29th, which is no bad performance.
Well, there you get the names there of the leading 9 or so runners. And El Abbasi, the Bahrainian, the former Moroccan, where he's been pretty much the last 45 minutes or so, at the back of the group, just slipping back 2 or 3 meters, benefiting when The sting comes out of the pace at the front, manages to get himself back on again, but now you've got Sonoda just sliding down the throttle and just saying, right, we're going to turn up the heat. And now, but at least he's got some company now as Kim, the Korean.
He looks pretty timely. Yes, he looks as though he's got a stitch as well, which is unfortunate for him. That was Sanchay Namket of Thailand, SEA Games silver medalist, over 5,000 metres and 10,000 metres, but they're a long way back down the course. And remember, they've got Tony Payne ahead of them for Thailand in no man's land after his brief flutter to rejoin the lead group. We're almost back down to 7. I think it's significant that Sonoda is now the one setting the pace. There are a couple of little palms in the backs going in that group. I think they were running so close together they were in danger of clipping each other's heels. And I did notice that the Mongolian Batachir at this station has managed to get his nutrition, having missed out on the last one. But look at the cadence, though, Martin, of... that's really nice. Batachir sharing a drink there with the favourite Inui. And I was just going to mention, Inui's gait hasn't changed at all. He still looks unbelievably comfortable. Yes, he'll be feeling it. He's been running for an hour and a half, in pretty tough conditions. But he still looks so smooth. But he's up on his toes like a half-miler, isn't he? 4.65, they're on the left. Sonoda of Japan out in front. Inui looking very relaxed. When you run like that, I suppose one of the issues is that you always tend to look pretty comfortable until the wheels really do come off, but he must be running well within himself. It's like he's out there just doing an easy midwinter session, like a half-miler, having to stop himself. Contrast his style to Sonoda. Sonoda's going well, but the head's leaning over a little bit. He's rolling. Inui is so smooth. Elabasi and Batachir, the man who's a veteran of 450 marathons or whatever it is, who simply just loves it. Clearly, he just thrives on the heavy workload that is necessary for somebody to be a top quality marathon runner year after year after year. He must have a hard body as well, because marathon bodies do take a lot of stick, running on the roads day after day after day. It's not just the competition, it's preparing for them. And when you've run as many marathons as he has, it's not quite 450, but it's quite a few, and done it at this sort of quality. But look at him there, in second place, 6.29, Batachir. Would be great if we get a medal, really would do. Sonoda pushing the pace. 5.83. Istabikov, Kyrgyzstan, Asian Championship bronze over 10,000 metres last year. Just checking his watch. He, along with his compatriot Tiapkin, were forcing the early pace. Not so now. Still looks fairly strong. And once again, familiar sight of Elabasi off the back of that group, but just about managing to maintain contact. So the leading group, 2 Chinese, 2 Japanese. We've got the Mongolian, we've got the Korean, Ri Kangbom, and we have the Bahrainian, Abdi Abdo, who, if your sentiments are with the athlete there wearing 121 on the right hand side of the group as we look, well, absolutely no reason in the way he's been running this race to suggest he can't go on and win a medal, perhaps even the title. Well, it's only his 3rd marathon. He ran his first last year in 2:12 on the nose, was second in Rome this year in 2:08:32. So it's clearly a distance at which he still has a great deal to learn, but it's also a distance he's getting more and more comfortable with. Only his 3rd outing over the 26.2. We said it before, but Elabasi really is losing contact now. It's about 10 metres back there to the Bahrainian.
former Moroccan. And if Sonoda keeps on working hard at the front there, then it won't be long before the Moroccan really does slip off and find himself running on his own.
Still yet to see the race proper between the favourites. They're keeping their powder dry, as they say. They're keeping their big drive for the finish under wraps. Alabassi just trying to shake some life into his arms. When you get towards the peak of your abilities in a marathon, you can sometimes get pins and needles in your hands, because when you start struggling, the body directs all the energy and all the blood towards the vital organs. So you can get a bit tingly in the hands. That's happened to me once during a marathon. Sonoda still leads. A fascinating climax in prospect to this marathon, there really is. The big men are all still there. They have run conservatively, they've run sensibly in this weather, on this course, and we may see some metaphorical fireworks fly in the closing stages. Abdo, the Bahrainian on the left, that long loping stride, keeps looking over his shoulder. Batachir is the slightly uncomfortable looking Mongolian with the French Legionnaire's cap. He's now alongside Sonoda, a man who seems uncomfortable when he's not forcing the pace. He's aiming at surely what would be his last Asian Games. He's aiming for his first major medal, the four-time Olympic marathon runner, having finished fourth in Incheon. And there's a little bit of a dispute going on there. That's Abdi Abdo has just been remonstrating with Batachir. I think he's a little bit unhappy with the slightly ragged way in which the Mongolian has been moving to the front and then drifting back. There's a little bit of needle in that group.
But look at his arm carriage as well. The arms do wave out a bit. He's got quite sharp elbows. So let's put some names, shall we, on numbers. There at the back you can see the former Moroccan, that's Alabassi. But in front, 7 athletes. The blue vest, 268, the Korean, Ri Kang Bom. The 2 Chinese, 197, 198. 197 is Dong. 198 is Duo. We have the Bahrainian, Abdi Abdo, 121. That's he there on the left-hand side of that leading group. The 2 Japanese, Sonoda, who's taken himself to the front, 477. Inui, the fastest man in the field, up on his toes there, wearing 465. Serod Batachir of Mongolia, 629. That's him in the second place at the moment. But I think if Abdo's got a few problems with Batachir, the best thing to do is just stay away from him. It's not a time in the race when you've been out there for 1 hour and 40, as they have now. Somewhere in the region of, I would have thought, 35 minutes or so to go. This is 30 kilometres. It's going to turn into a 10-kilometre race. We've got about 35 minutes out there, I would have thought. But they are starting to race now with Sonoda. And this will give a little bit of inspiration and a bit of a kick. The drinks table there, a little bit of palms being squeezed into the backs or the middle of the backs of athletes there as they pick up drinks and do just get in one another's way a little, but that was fairly smooth. Sonoda tosses the drinks bottle away. They're in second place, Abdo, and now it's breaking up. Now we're getting the move. Sonoda has kicked on. Look how relaxed Abdo looks there in second place.
And I know a couple of metres allowances have to be made for the few metres that 1 or 2 do lose when they go through the drink stations, but Ri Kang Bom has immediately become detached from the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. He's now off the back, and so too for the first time is Batachir, who now finds himself drifting. There's the Korean Ri Kang Bom And all of a sudden, Batachir of Mongolia finds himself in 7th place. El Abbasi is in 6th. They've gone through 30k, and now we get down to the really, really important stage of this race. And it looks very much as though that group of 8 have been shattered, and there are now still just about 6 in touch, with Sonoda definitely appearing to adhere to a pre-race tactic of putting the hammer down at 30k. Interesting as well, Martin, that Inui put a cap on.
No, it's going to make exactly the point.
Station.
As Sonoda puts the hammer down, Inui puts the cap on. And it seems quite arbitrary in some respects, but there's absolutely no doubt here that the sight of that 30-kilometre barrier has turned this into, banner I should say, has turned this into a 12.2-kilometre race. Because now the racing has really started. That leading group has splintered. The quality has come to the front. And it is, Sonoda is doing it, but you get a sense, looking at his face, he's looking a little bit uncomfortable. There have been 1 or 2 grimaces. He's perhaps really here serving a purpose for men behind him. Well, there he is. We've certainly learnt a bit about him today. Tony Payne wearing the best of Thailand. Had his spell at the front, coming out of the main stadium. Then he caught the leading group, looking rather laboured. But he's going to be very close to that lifetime best. I would have thought at 2:19 if he keeps going.
Certainly got a chance of a PB, and you can't ask any more of an athlete in a major championship than a personal best.
But look how comfortable Inui is on the right. He's still looking like an 800-metre man. I mean, the last time I saw an athlete looking that comfortable, his name was Steve Ovett, and he was running at Crystal Palace in a 1,500-metre race. This fella is running a marathon.
And also, how interesting, Martin, that we had El Abbasi, always the man who looked as though he would be the first of the leading 8 to go. We've lost Ri Kang Bum. We have at least temporarily, well, maybe his race is over for the medals. We've lost Batachir of Mongolia. El Abbasi still looks uncomfortable, and yet he's still in touch with the leaders. 8 have now become 6.
He's a hard fella, isn't he? The Moroccan. He must feel like toothache to the rest. He's nagging, and he simply won't go away.
Sonoda noticeably stepped up the pace, having gone through 30k. This is Ri Kang Bom, 25-year-old, twice a winner of the Pyongyang Marathon, right up there with the leading 8. But having gone through 30k, he was the first and clearest casualty of Sonoda's little step up in pace. He's looking up the course to Serod Batachir to see whether he can somehow regain some momentum, but with an hour and 3/4 on the board, his quest for a medal, you suspect, is over. This is the leading group of 6.
So Sonoda, who's done all the work over the course of the last 5 kilometres, he's the man who's broken the field. Look at the Bahrainian, the former Moroccan, El Abbasi. He simply will not go away, will he? The Chinese wearing 197, that's Dong Guaozhan. He on the back of this leading group. Well, it does go to suggest that Sonoda's little burst, he's eased back on the accelerator pedal a little. All 6 men at the moment looking fairly relaxed. Well, Batachir's been broken.
I think from a neutral's point of view, we were both hoping that maybe the 4th place veteran who's in his 56th marathon might have a chance of a medal, but
would have been a cracking story, wouldn't it?
It would, but that looks as though that's slipping away. The medals, barring some very strange set of circumstances, will be going to China, Bahrain and Japan. We have 2 men from each nation in this group of 6. Abdo and El Abbasi for Bahrain, Dong and Duo for China, and of course Inui, the pre-race favourite, 4.65, and Sonoda, his teammate, who I think has done him a bit of a favour by just increasing the tempo a fraction. It's Dong, the national champion for China, at the back of that group now. And we've been talking in glowing terms about Inui and how comfortable he looks. Abdo, far less experienced marathon runner, the younger man, 21 years of age, he looks good also in second place. Still yet to run a bad marathon, and it's a good trajectory for the Bahrainian. 2:12 in his first, 2:08.32 in Rome, clipping heels there with 1:98, which is Duo, who was second in those Chinese championships, and he's all of a sudden got a problem. Now that is significant. I thought he'd had his heels clipped. I'm not sure whether we'll get a glimpse now. Did his shoe come off, or has he got a more sinister problem here? I thought he was looking really good, but that happened very quickly, Martin, didn't it? Very quickly. All of a sudden, having looked really good, tagging along the pace set by Sonoda, the Bahrainian has encountered a problem. Now, is it a temporary one, or is he somehow going to reattach himself? I'm not quite sure what happened there. It did look like it was a clip of heels.
Well, if it was a clip of heels, then there was... Oh, no. He's slowing down again, isn't he? I think there's a muscle problem. There must be a muscle problem there. Probably lower leg. But you saw him there. He just checked his stride. 3 or 4 strides. He's going again now. But you get a sense here that there must be a muscle problem. Let's just see. Let's look at the face. Yeah, he's moved off to the side of the road, hasn't he?
He just got in. He just got in the way of Duo. He's clearly got a problem. He didn't have his heels clipped. He just suddenly slowed down.
There's a cramping, isn't there? Now, what is it? Is it lower leg? Could well be. Calf muscles. Maybe he's getting a cramp there somewhere. 2 or 3 times now he's had to pause. I think we can work on the basis that unless there is a dramatic rejuvenation here, there's probably relatively little wrong with the heart and lungs. It's purely and simply a muscle cramp. Could be a hamstring, perhaps more likely a calf, top of the Achilles, something like that.
That'll be very disappointing news for Abdi Abdo, because he had looked, up until about a minute and a half ago, very, very good indeed. And we were expecting a Bahrainian to be in the mix. He is now moving up and past Dong. We will keep a very close eye on whether he recovers. We were expecting a Bahrainian to be in the shake-up for a medal, but we weren't necessarily expecting it to be El Abbasi, the relatively inexperienced Moroccan who now represents Bahrain. But look at this.
Look at Abdo.
He's managing to get going again. If he has had a cramp, Martin, he has somehow managed to respond. And I wonder whether the 2 Japanese have noticed. And look at that. His compatriot El Abbasi saying, come on, rejoin this. We think we've got a chance. Well, you don't often see an athlete who becomes detached this late in a marathon managing to get back. But somehow he is rejoining the leading 4, which becomes a leading 5.
And let's face it, Rob, it could only happen in a race which, frankly, by global marathon terms in 2018 is slow. You can't afford to almost break down to a jog twice and get back in the race in the major city marathon when it's being run at 2:03. You simply will never be able to run fast enough to do that. But with a bit of encouragement for his teammate, I mean, these 2 Bahrainians, we've had the former Moroccan there, who looked to be in pain, whose time within that leading group seemed to be coming to an end. He's dropped off the back once, it happened twice, it happened 3 times, and there he is. And you wouldn't put it past him here, picking up a medal. I mean, looking at this leading group now, there's only one man who appears to have run the race he wants to, and that is Hiroto Inui. 4.65. The only muscles he's moved of any significance over the course of the last hour and 50 minutes was perhaps to reach the side of the road, pick up a peak cap and pop it on the top of his head, because he really is looking all over the winner at this moment. But the issue is in the marathon, it is a bit of a hackneyed line, but anything can happen. when you get to the end. We saw that there with Abdi Abdo. Where did that come from? It may just have hit him entirely by surprise, but he's now back in the race. We just got to hope he doesn't get another cramp, doesn't get another leg problem. If he does, that surely will be the end of him.
2 Japanese men, 2 Bahrainians, 1 Chinese athlete. There's the second of them. That's Dong Zhuogan, the national champion. He's drifted off the back. He's now in 6th. It's a good effort in really tough conditions, but he will not be on the podium. The question, as far as the lead group is concerned, how late do you leave it? Because Abdo now, once again, looks okay. Sonoda seems as though he's running the kind of race where he doesn't want it to come down to a significant increase of tempo in the last 1 or 2K. But Inouye looks very happy to track his compatriot and tick down the kilometres as we edge towards the finish of the race. He's definitely looking the most comfortable, but how late is he prepared to leave it? He knows this is a wonderful chance for a major, major title. Martin has been talking about his spell in the commentary box at the swimming pool, talking about Olympic champions looking as though they're on the verge of tears by becoming an Asian champion. This Asian Games means a huge amount to these men. How late is Inouye prepared to leave it, do you think?
Well, Inouye's also got to tell himself if he was running one of those 2:06 marathons, he now would be getting within 13 minutes of the finish. That's not the case here. He's probably got, what, another 20 minutes to run. So again, he has to do the sums. Thankfully for him, his teammate Sonoda, he's doing the work. But Inouye moving onto his shoulder and rather in the fashion of a track racer here, putting himself somewhere where he can cover absolutely every move that comes. The unknown quantity, perhaps even to himself now, is Abdi Abdo. He will be hoping and praying that those problems he had, which were almost certainly a cramp of some sort in his lower leg, do not return. If they do, that'll finish him off. Who knows? It would be a stunning story if he can go on and win this race. Sonoda's kicking again, I think.
Little grimace on the face of Hayato Sonoda, second in Oita. This is his 11th marathon, a 63-minute half marathon runner, as well as that sub 2:10 earlier this year. He's a class campaigner and he's worth his spot in the leading 5 here. You suspect from the tactics he's employing that he will be hoping, yes, of course, there'll be some kind of support for his teammate, but at this stage of a marathon, it's every man for himself. I think Sonoda's hoping that by continuing to force the pace, 1 or 2 might begin to drop off, and that would give him a chance of a medal, because he will know Inouye's strengths very well indeed, and he will, you suspect, realise that at this stage, unless something happens to Inouye, he might not have the beating of his compatriot, but he wants a medal. He wants to get on the podium. But if that's the case, the Japanese man who's been forcing the pace and went to the front at 30-odd K, he needs 2 more men to drop off this group. And at the moment, all 5 are still there, including the man we've got used to seeing at the back of the group, grimacing, El Hassan El Abbasi, is still there, the Bahrainian. 2 Japanese, 2 Bahrainians, and still that loping stride of Duo Bougie of China, just inside the world's top 100 at the Olympics a couple of years ago. But when will the big move come from Inouye, who has kept thus far his powder dry?
Yes, to use a metaphor from the racing game, I mean, he's one of these runners who's still on the bridle. He's a bit like the great Lester Piggott in the old days in the Derby. He's got his hands full. He's come round Tattenham Corner. It's all about when is he going to deliver his challenge. But now, and who would have thought this would be possible 10 kilometres ago, 15 kilometres ago? El Abbasi, who appeared to be struggling for so long in this race, he has gone to the front. So this is the first move from him. Are we having a slight shift? Well, having done that, he's immediately taken his foot off the accelerator. Tsunoda again saying, look, I belong at the front. The peak cap has now come off for Inui. I wonder if that's an indication.
He's certainly taking on board a lot of water, much of which he's poured over his head. This is the chaser Dong Gujian, China's national champion. Just struggling a little bit. Batachir has drifted back. We can see Ri Kang Bon behind the Chinese runner, but it's about the lead 5. We're still no closer to working out who's feeling freshest here. 7 kilometres to go. And maybe, Martin, maybe for the first time, Inui taking a lot of liquid on board here. Maybe he is feeling it just a fraction. Still looks good. His leg cadence looks as good as it has done since the start of the race. But he wouldn't be human if he wasn't feeling some kind of discomfort, having run for nearly 2 hours already.
Yes, just passing through that magnificent welcome fountain. And it certainly will be a welcome sight to these men as they make their way now into the last few kilometres of the race. They're going to be going for maybe just inside 20 minutes more. It's going to be certainly one of the slowest Asian Games marathons we've ever seen. If you look back at the winning times over recent years, the last title, well, there was only a second between the gold and silver medalists 4 years ago when Al-Hassan Mahboub of Bahrain won in 2:12.38. 2:11 winning time in 2:10. Mubarak Shami when he won in the heat of Doha 12 years ago, 2:12.44. Lee Bongju, his back-to-back wins in 98 and 2002. One of them was a slow one, 2:14. But you've got to go back 40 years and more before we've had a slower Asian Games marathon than this. And one thing that these pictures don't communicate to you at home is just how oppressive the heat and the humidity is. Even starting at 6 in the morning, that was out of necessity. It really is fierce out there. You spend 10, 15 minutes in, there's never quite direct sunshine here, but when the sun starts burning through the haze, it is fierce. And these men are starting to suffer from that now. And bear in mind, they've been on their feet now running for just, 40-odd seconds short of 2 hours.
A really tough way to become an Asian Games champion. And there are still 5 men very much in the hunt. A look of intense concentration on the faces of both men from Japan. Hayato Tsunoda has led for about the last 20-odd minutes. He's been the one setting the tone. Hiroto Inui has never displayed a flicker of emotion. Not quite running on his toes. Still a front foot strike. He still looks good. And the very young, very talented Bahrainian Abdi Abdo has come through what must have been an attack of cramp. Suddenly lost touch with the leaders, but managed to reattach himself. What about the man from China, just running on the left of picture with his cap, giving himself an opportunity to finish on the podium for what would be a great moment for him. And the ever grimacing El Abbasi of Bahrain represented Morocco until 5 years ago. It's only his second marathon. He ran just a shade inside 2:11 when he finished second in Lisbon at the back end of last year. His head's rocking and rolling and he's grimacing, but he's still there, unlike so many others.
Yes, Duo Bougie. We haven't seen too much of him, really. He's run a very quiet race, but he's never been anything but in that leading group. You can see him on the right there with the white peak cap. He's certainly done nothing wrong so far, but it's Tsunoda who's doing the work here for his teammate. I don't think he's necessarily consciously doing it for his teammate, but he might as well be. And now there's another kick from Tsunoda. He's gone to the front. He's trying to break the leading group. And once again, you can see at the back, El Abbasi certainly appears to miss the first runner. He's changing direction here, is El Abbasi. moving over there to the fountain. That's ahead of us. Two of them opting to go through. Duo is the other.
I would have thought all 5 men would run under that in these brutal conditions, but El Abbasi clearly feeling he desperately needed a cooling shower, and it looks as though, with a little expression of pain on his face, Sonoda discards the cap, still forcing the pace at the front. I think the second Japanese athlete, if we look at Inui as the favourite, 4.77, I think Sonoda is determined not to let this come down to a sprint. That is his best chance of getting a medal, and he's really feeling the effects of having forced the pace. You can see it in his face.
Yeah, from time to time. Oh, and now we've lost him again. And I wonder if that's cramp or simply the effects of the race for Abdi Abdo, because quite dramatically, he's dropped off the leading group again. And perhaps that was inevitable, because it's very, very rare in an event like this that you get a cramp in the lower limb, and it doesn't come back sooner rather than later. And I get a sense it has now happened. And also Duo's beginning to feel the effects, and the movements at the front, and look who's doing it. Who would have thought it? El Abbasi switching over to the other side of the road and then looking across to Inui. And the race now is really on. They're through 2 hours. They're into the last 12 minutes or so. They've got less than 3 miles to go. And 2 men are away. And it's all happened in little more than the bat of an eyelid.
Amazing transformation. And even more incredibly, look at the way El Abbasi is wasting energy, veering from left to right. He clearly wants to run on his own. He doesn't want Inui for company. Inui now coming back across towards the right-hand side, but that's a really wasteful use of energy at a key stage of the race. But how about this? The man who's grimaced and has hung on to the leading group is now setting the pace, but Inui is on his shoulder like a shadow.
Well, those are the tactics, Rob, that you tend to associate with the high bank in the velodrome. You know those moments when the bikes, they're up there right at the top of the banking and they're looking at one another? That's almost as if what El Abbasi was doing. He's trying to invite the Japanese runner Inui just to come inside, go in front. But Inui, his tactics are clear. He's sitting there in the wake of the Bahrainian. He's not going to move until he believes the moment is absolutely right for him to go on and take the title.
We've spoken at great length about Inui. El Abbasi, former track specialist, has come through the ranks. Asian Games champion over 10,000 metres 4 years ago. He was 21st in the World Half Marathon Championships in Valencia at the end of March, and 15th in the World Cross Country Championships in Guiyang. I covered that, and the conditions were tough 3 years ago. A great race won by Jeffrey Kipsang Kamworor. And the lesson from that, Rob, is that we know he's versatile. He's good across the country. He's got a track pedigree. He will have decent leg speed. Looking at the way that Inui runs, you have to think that when he has to, this man can produce more leg speed than the Bahrainian. But it's very easy to talk of that when these men have been running for more than 2 hours in utterly punishing heat and humidity. But now, for the first time, Inui has gone to the front. Now, this could prove to be the decisive moment in the race. If Inui can't break him now, suddenly that will lift the spirits of El Abbasi. He'll think, hang on, the Japanese looks great, but he can't be feeling too good. There's a chance for me here. And suddenly the complexion of the race will change. And there's no doubt here, Inui at the moment can't shrug him off. I think that's in his mind. He knows El Abbasi has track speed, has strength in his legs from cross-country, and is a little bit of an unknown quantity when it comes to marathons, because he's only run one when he was second in Lisbon last year. He is wasting quite a lot of energy looking around. He's no longer veering left to right. And what an immense battle is unfolding just out of shot for the bronze between Sonoda and Duo of China. It was an incredible break. As soon as Abdo felt the effects of whatever it was that was causing him, and it must have been a cramp, you suspect, as soon as Abdo left that 5 and drifted off the back, there was an injection of pace. And there, for the very first time in the race, not only is he now leading for the first time, that's the first time he's looked over his shoulder. It's almost as if he's inviting the Bahrainian to come through on his inside. This is fascinating. It's a duel in the sun, in baking heat, with searing humidity. And it's happening not just for the gold, but for the bronze as well. But the real pressure for the battle between Sonoda and Duo is that the one who wins that battle gets on the podium, the one who doesn't finishes in that agonising position of 4th. Inouye and El Abbasi look as though they're going to share gold and silver. It will simply be a question of which way round. Inouye will see this as his chance of Asian Games history and his chance to be the first Japanese champion since 1986.
Well, Inouye finds himself at the front again. And this time it's El Abbasi who, if he chooses, can sit in the wake of the Japanese, but he's almost pushing there on his left shoulder as if to say, look, I'm still here. I'm a hard man. It's going to take a lot to shrug me off. And it's so proving for Inouye. And now he's going again. There is certainly an effort. Now, can the Bahrainian respond to this? Inouye's not quite throwing everything into this, but this is certainly his bid for victory.
I think his form and his cadence here indicate that he does not want this to come down to a sprint as they close in on the stadium. What a shock it would be if El Abbasi managed to beat by far the fastest man in the field. His face doesn't give much away, Inouye, but this is his bid for glory. And once again, as we've seen him do a couple of times in the race, El Abbasi just shaking out those arms. He's been continually and repeatedly looking at his watch. He's got to hang on here, and at the moment he's doing a great job of doing so. Fascinating climax in prospect here in brutal conditions in Jakarta.
It's no doubt who's hurting the most. It's El Abbasi. But he appears to have an incredible pain threshold. Inouye's tried twice now, and he hasn't broken him. And now the Bahrainian is moving to the front. And he's just looking across to say, Inouye, well, is that the best you've got? What else have you got left in the locker? Because believe me, I've got a huge heart. And now, Inouye, for a moment there, threatening to go to the front. And then the cadence drops again.
This is why marathons are so good to watch. Two men side by side who have poured their hearts and soul out onto the streets of the Indonesian capital, and there is still nothing to separate them. Side by side in their battle for Asian Games glory. What a race this is turning out to be. A contrast of styles. Two men who are closing in on what would for both of them be the biggest moment of their career. And we still don't know who is going to become the Asian Games marathon champion for 2018. Different body types, different cadence. El Abbasi has grimaced his way round the course. Inouye, in contrast, has floated his way round. But Inouye will not be taking this for granted. He knows the Bahrainian is a class act. He has weathered his various storms as he hung on grimly to that group of 8, and he's gasping for air, but he's still there, and Inouye glances over. He cannot rid himself of the Bahrainian yet. What's he got to do to get his hands on this gold medal? He's got to find something else.
And they are just running in formation here, shoulder to shoulder. They've been going for more than 2 hours and 11 minutes. Still got 2 kilometres remaining. it's going to be an incredibly slow time. Although, as Rob has said, when it comes to championship marathons, and particularly in conditions like this, that is the 40-kilometre point. There's no doubt that those conditions have dictated the race. Both men taking water aboard. It'll be over the head in a moment. There it is. It's the last 7 minutes or so of racing. It has been a negative split. It will be a faster second half, but it will be one of the slowest Asian Games marathons we've ever seen, perhaps for 50 years. This is the race for the bronze medal. Tsunoda of Japan. Behind him, duo of China. But now, Rob, well, in the distance, on a straight stretch of road, they can just about catch the two leaders, but they've dropped back quite a margin.
They have. As soon as Abdo disappeared off the back of the pace, we had that battle for bronze emerging, and there's nothing to separate them either. Two great stories unfolding here, with a little over 4 laps of a track separating one of these men from the title. They will begin to think about this last desperate push for glory. 3/4 of a lap inside the Gelora Bung Karno Stadium. Will they both enter and emerge from the shadow of the tunnel still locked together with 300 metres to go? That would be an agonising way to lose an Asian Games title. And look at this from Inouye. He is desperate to avoid a sprint finish, and still, every time he asks the question, thus far, the Bahrainian is coming up with an answer. They're miles clear of the two men battling for bronze. This is truly fascinating here.
And you may have seen a couple of moments ago, they went round what was virtually a hairpin turn. That's the last thing a marathon runner wants with less than 2 kilometres remaining. The Bahrainian laboured round it. At that point, Inouye thought, right, now is the time to kick on. Now is time for my third kick to finally break him. He tried and he failed. And now, again, it's almost the cycling tactics again. For the 4th time, Inouye eases down on the accelerator. Pain etched across the face of the Bahrainian, but still he's there. He's sticking to him like glue.
That was the biggest drive we've seen yet from Inouye to try and get away from the Bahrainian. And for the very first time, the face that tells you nothing is now etched in pain. Hiroto Inouye may have been the favourite for this race. He may have come in here as the fastest man in the field by quite some margin on paper, but he really is going to have to earn this gold medal. And what about this battle for bronze? Hayato Tsunoda still cannot shake off the long, loping, grimacing stride of Duo Buji. Twice he's finished 5th in the Asian Championships over 5,000 metres. Now the Japanese man desperate to open up a couple of metres. It's a mirror of the battle going on for the gold. Only one of them is going to stand atop the podium. They are both absolutely shattered. Look at the number of people lining the course here in Jakarta. A brilliantly supported event and a brilliantly supported race at just gone 8:15 on a Saturday morning. Those who have got out of bed early are witnessing one of the great duels in Asian Games marathon history. It might not be the quickest, but this is absolutely fascinating. They've poured their hearts and souls into this race, and we still don't know which man is going to take the glory.
Well, you do wonder if the last 2 or 3